Now, before we go learn about how React works behind the scenes, let's quickly set up and walk through a small demo project that we're going to need in a few lectures of this section. Now, this time around, we will do things a bit differently. So we will not create a new project using create React app. Instead, in the starter files, I already basically have that entire project for you to copy. So open up the starter files, and then here in this folder called How React Works, let's copy this entire starter folder. So copy all of this right into the folder where we are building our projects. And so then simply call it How React Works. So you see that here we actually have the source folder, we have the public folder, and also these other files that are always automatically created by create React app. But again, this time we are not doing that because, well, everything has been done already for us. And so now all we have to do is to take this folder, open it up in VS Code like this, and then we need to install all the packages. So the node modules folder, which is the folder where all the npm packages are installed, is of course not here. So all the libraries like React, React DOM, and so on, they are not here. So we need to install them. But that's fortunately very easy. So let's open up our terminal here. It's here in view. And well, that's really small here. And as always, make sure that you are in the correct folder. And then all we have to do is to say npm install or npm I for short. So hit enter, and then this will install all the packages that are necessary for this create React application. So it will get this information here from this package.json file. Okay, and we see that it's already done. And so we can now start this project. So just write npm start. And then in my case here, it's asking me if I want to run the app on another port. And so that's because I already had something running here on 3000. So that's basically the demo project, but let's close that for now actually. So just inspecting this, and then let's open up our app.js file as always. So this time around in this section, I gave you this already started project so that you can now get the experience of looking at a project where someone already started writing some code. So that's exactly what we have here. So some code here has already been written, and so you cannot pretend that basically some other developer on your team wrote this. So it's extremely important that you be able to understand other developers' code, especially when you work on a team as a professional React developer someday. And so, before we now start this section, I just want us to quickly walk through this code here so I can explain you how it works on a high level. And then by doing so, you can see how we can effectively read code that we didn't write ourselves. So let's start in the app component here, and all that one does is to include the tabbed component. And it passes the content in there, which is simply this array of objects here. So pretty standard. Then the tabbed component has some state variable here, which indicates the current tab. So it seems like this is a number. And then down here, we can see that the active tab state is used to render this tab content component using as the content array at the position of the currently active tab. So this at here is basically modern JavaScript, which is the same as this here. So basically reading something out of an array. And that array, again, is this content array up here. So for example, if the state here was 2, then the content here in the tab would be 0, 1, 2. So it would be this object right here. All right, let's just put this back here to this more modern form. And then let's check out what this tab content here actually is. And it's also always a good idea to take a look at the component tree. And so let's make this here bigger. And so indeed we have the app, we have tabbed, and then we have the tab content in there. And of course we also have these 4 tabs, but we will leave them for a bit later. So in here, in the tab content, let's see what we have. So we get the tab item, which is basically the content that we're going to use here. So we can double click on that, and then we see where it has been used. So we see that we use item.summary and item.details. Then we also see that we have 2 state variables here. So that's show details and set show details. And again, by double clicking, VS Code will then highlight all of them. So here we can see that we're doing some conditional rendering with this show details. And so, yeah, by default, this is true. And then only in that case, we are displaying the item details. And then we change that state down here where we have set show details in this button. And so this here is exactly that button. So if we click that, then here the text disappears. So this paragraph right here disappears. Right? Then we also have these 2 buttons down here, but we see that they have no event handler attached. So if we click here, then nothing happens. Then finally, we also have those hearts here, and that's why we have this second state of likes. So you see that likes is indeed used here, and then this button here has the handle ink function. So this first one here, while the second button again has no handler. So here nothing happens, but here each time we click, basically 1 like is added there. And so that's because of the handle ink function. So what this one does is simply take the current likes and adding 1 and then setting that as the new likes state. Now notice how here we didn't use a callback function in order to set state based on the current state, but more about that later. So I think this component here is pretty clear. And so let's now go back here and see what these tabs here actually are. So here we have these 4 tabs, and notice how we are actually writing them one by one manually and not looping over some array. So our array has these 3 elements here, and so the first 3 elements, so these 3 are for those 3 objects, and then we have another one where the number is 3. But let's take a look at that a bit later. So here we have the num as a prop, we have the active tab, and we have the onClick prop. And as the onClick, we are simply passing the setActiveTab state setter function. Now let's go here into the tab and see what happens there. So basically a tab is just a button. So it's these buttons right here. And what happens when we click on this button is that the onClick function is called with the current number. So let's then actually go back to where these props are passed so that we can understand what the onClick and the num actually are. So onClick is setActiveTab, and num are these numbers here. And so basically when we click on this first tab, it means that the active tab will get set to 0. And the same down here. So when we click on this tab right here, then the active tab will get set to 1, which is exactly what we have here. Then, based on this state, as I explained in the beginning, we see that the tab content will be rendered, at least if that value is less or equal to. So if it's greater than 2, which happens in this case, then the different content will be displayed. So let's check that out. And so this one is simply this one div, which has a simple h4. Okay, so again, basically the goal of this other tab right here is just to display this different content component right here. So let's see that in action. And so, indeed, when we click on tab 2, you see that the content here changed. And so the title here and the text are exactly what we have here in this second object. And then the same here. So here we now have the third object. So the title and the text. And finally, the last one is for that different content. And you saw that down here, actually the component tree changed. All right. And here, if we wrote any other number, like 0, then of course, you see that the number changed here. So that is always the number plus 1. And we get then the very first object. So now it says React is a library for building UIs. So just like here. And also both of them are now marked active, which also happens inside that tab component. But of course, let's put it back to 2. And with this, I think it is pretty clear what this very small demo application does. But before you move on to the next lecture, make sure that you take some more time to analyze this code on your own so that you truly understand what exactly is happening here.